Hello and welcome to High Caliber TV, your source for figure and model updates every Wednesday and Friday. Today on the Workbench I'm going to be showing off the initial stages of my next project. As you can see here, this is the Legend base that I picked up at the IPMS Nationals this past week, and some Alpine figures that I've been very much meaning to do ever since I bought them from myself. So here we go. So far I've cleared the casting block off of here. It was a bit of a task. I went through 3 of the disposable saw blades that you can re-equip onto the apparatus, and when they overheat they snap really easily. Of course, that's why they're so inexpensive and you can replace them really easily. Anyway, so as you can see, there's an initial layer of body fill on here to clear up all the blemishes left by the casting block and the removal, and then another thin layer of green stuff. And then over top of that, once the primer had been applied, when you apply primer, it often illustrates and your eye can pick out the blemishes really easily. And since it's the one side of the base that would have any imperfections, and they'd stand out really easily, so I wanted to make sure that they were clear. So over top of the green stuff, I put another layer of body fill on, sanded it down once it was dried. If you have multiple layers, you can actually tell if you're getting down to a smooth surface, because you'll see the lower layers peek through at the high points on the base, and the upper layers will stay here when it becomes flat. So there we go. It's all primed now. I'm gonna start detailing it. The figures are, of course, Alpine, so they're exceedingly easy to clean up and assemble. There was actually no cleanup on these figures other than the casting blocks, which was, you know, it's always nice. It keeps things moving along pretty quickly. I applied a small pin here on the bottom of his heel, as always, and what I've started doing is I take my pin holding thing with the measurement wheel in the center, and I measured the diameter of the brass rod that I use for pinning, and then I went several steps above that to drill the holes in the base, the corresponding holes for the pins, which would allow me to remove or be a bit more flexible with the pinning process. It's just a little tip I picked up. Here's the other figure. Not much to talk about so far. They're just cleaned up and primed. God, I love these figures. So here he is with his green trousers painted. I did a 2-stage layering process on this. So what I mean by that is I went over it twice and basically applied the highlights and the shadows twice, which gives it a much more varied and slightly more random look while still being uniform. So what I did was I began with the counter shading, as you can see still here on the parts of the uniform that aren't green and that weren't painted. The counter shading was simply pure black sprayed up at an angle and into, like, between his legs, underneath the cuffs of the pants, around the belt, things like that, under the knees, under the butt. And then I began to gradually build up the shadows. So for those, I used a mix of these 3 colors. This one is the dominant color. This is the prime color that was used for highlights, the base coat, and just generally everything. It was there during the whole process. But then I used olive drab and German green, because German green's quite dark actually. And those were the colors that I used for the shadows on the first layer, and then I built it up using really thin paint, mind you, and it was really gradual. There wasn't any point when I was hosing air out of the airbrush. So once that had all dried, I began to work on the initial highlights, and you can still see the extreme highlights at the top of the trousers here. Now for those highlights as always, I gradually phased out the colors that were used in the shadows. So the initial highlight was a mix of all of these with almost none of this. And then from then on, it was just these two. And I gradually added drops of this in until it looked, until it looked extreme, and then I went one drop more, because that's where the two-stage layering process comes in, because you'll go extreme and then a drop more, and then you'll think, oh no, what have I done? I ruined the figure. He looks like he's standing directly beside the sun. And then from there, I went and began to spray directly on using a mix of a few colors. As always, with the Panzer, olive green, light brown, and German green. And these were mixed with this one, as always, of course, being the dominant color. But adding that sand brown, you'll actually get a look that you'll begin the weathering, and it'll be organic in the highlight process, so it won't look like you've weathered it. It'll look like he's naturally worn in the color, as long as you don't overdo it. Because as you can see, there are certain areas that still have a bit of a brown tinge, but they're still the primary color, that German olive green. So I began to spray that directly on, and occasionally, as I added a bit more of this mix again, but never going to that initial extreme. I never went to a point when the sand was dominant over the green. I turned him over like that and just really gently sprayed down areas like that, and on the butt, on the bottoms of the trousers, just the areas where the light would catch. As you can see, how it's dark under the leg and light on the calf or on his shin. I think it turned out all right. I'm looking forward to seeing how the rest of this figure goes. Of course, I am still expanding my model air collection, so I need to get some basic neutral grays for the uniforms, but that'll be coming up. And one more thing before I finish the video off. I've just been, since I had all those browns and greens in the airbrush at the time, I cleared out the airbrush by spraying them on in generally random patterns on the base, and as you can see, it's all blacked out now. And so, yeah, this area down here is supposed to be the riverbed, or low tide, or, you know, whatever. I'm not planning on putting any acrylic in it, but I'm probably going to give it a slightly glossy coat at the end just to make it look like it's a bit damp. So this is obviously going to be significantly darker because of the nature of the soil. It's damp, so it's going to be darker than the soil on the road. So I've done a second layer of counter shading. I don't think that's necessary, but I'm just sort of experimenting on this base. And yeah, it's coming along all right. This is obviously not what it's going to look like in the end. There's still a whole lot of layering, hand brushing, and pigments to be applied. So far, so good. So for these figures, of course, we don't sell Legend, but the Alpine stuff we do sell, and lots of other figures. Be sure to check us out at highcaliberminiatures.com. Links in the description as always. Follow us on Facebook, Pinterest, and Twitter for stock updates. As I mentioned, we've gotten a lot of new stock in recently. Tommy's War line and MiniSoldiers lines, which I am just astounded by. It's always bringing in figures that I've never tried out before, but that I just have a hunch that they're going to be high quality, and then bringing them in, and it's just such a relief to find that they live up to your standards and your hopes when you unpack the box and all that. So we've got those figures in, and I can highly recommend MiniSoldiers and Tommy's War. So yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I will see you next time.